Picture this. A man alone beside a river at night. He has just sent his wife across to the other side. He has sent his children across. He has sent every animal he owns, every servant he has, every possession he carries. They are all on the far bank now, sleeping in the dark. And he is here, on this side, by himself. He cannot sleep. He cannot pray. Tomorrow at sunrise his brother arrives with 400 armed men. There is a very real chance that by tomorrow afternoon he will be dead. His wives will be widows, and his children will be slaves. So he stands by the river, listening to the water, trying to remember if he has ever in his 97 years on this earth been more afraid than he is right now. And then someone steps out of the darkness. You probably already know the man's name. It is Jacob. The river is called the Jabbok. And by the time the sun comes up, the stranger will have wrestled him until dawn, dislocated his hip with a single touch, and renamed him in front of God and creation. Jacob will walk away from this riverbank with a limp. He will keep until the day he dies. He lived to be 147 years old, which means for 50 years every single morning. When he stood up from bed, every step he took, across every floor in every tent, something in his body remembered. The night God came down to a riverbank to fight him. We will get to that night, but not yet. Because that night was not the first time God came down, and it was not the last. Before the manger you grew up picturing. Before the shepherds you sang about as a child, before the star over Bethlehem. God walked on this earth 6 different times, in disguise, to one person at a time, always alone, always in the worst moment of their life. Always asking a question, always leaving a mark. Christians have had a name for this for almost 2,000 years. They call it a Christophany, from the Greek. Christos, anointed one, phaneroo, to make visible. Christ, made visible, before he was born. So this is not a video about Old Testament stories. This is not a video about angel visitations. This is not a video about ancient mysteries. This is a video about a person, the same person, showing up in disguise 6 times across 2,000 years of human history before he finally took off the disguise in a feeding trough in Bethlehem. 6 times he came. He always came alone. He always asked a question. He always left a mark. And then a 7th time. The 7th time was different. The 7th time. He did not leave. We will get to that. But first you have to come with me all the way back. All the way back to the very first time God walked among us. To a garden. To a couple hiding behind some trees. To the cool of the day. The Bible opens with a strange detail. After the man and the woman have eaten from the tree, they were told not to touch after the silence that follows the bite. After the moment, they look down and realize for the first time that they are naked. They hear something, footsteps. The text says they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. Walking. Here's what most people miss. The Hebrew word for that walking is mithalek. It is not just any walking. It is the kind of walking a friend does. The kind of walking you do when you are not in a hurry and you are not going anywhere. The same word will be used a few chapters later to describe how a man named Enoch walked with God so closely that one day God just took him home and skipped the dying part. That is the kind of walking that is happening in the garden, which means whatever you have been told about Eden, whatever Sunday school picture of an angry deity storming through the trees with a lightning bolt, You need to set it down. Because the God who came walking in the cool of the day was not coming to punish. He was coming to talk, the way he always had, the way he always did, until that day. And on that day when the man and the woman heard his footsteps, they hid. You have to feel the weight of that. The most loved people in creation hid from the one who loved them. They crouched behind trees. They wove fig leaves over their bodies. They held their breath, and he came anyway. He stood in the garden, and he asked the first question he ever asks in the Bible. He did not say, "What did you do?" He did not say, "How could you?" He said 3 words, "Where are you?" He asked it knowing the answer. He asked because he wanted them to come out. This is the first time God walks on earth, and this is the first pattern. He came for them. He asked them a question, and he left them with a mark. They were sent east of Eden, the gates closed behind them, and from that day forward, every human being born of woman would carry the ache of a place we have never seen, but somehow remember. That is visit number 1. 2,000 years pass. The next time God walks on earth, he does not come to a king. He does not come to a priest. He does not come to a man at all. He comes to a teenage girl, Egyptian, a slave, pregnant, running. Her name is Hagar. She has been used. Her mistress Sarah could not have a child, so Sarah handed Hagar over to Abraham like you would hand over a cup. And it worked. The baby took. And the moment Hagar's belly started to show, Sarah turned on her. So Hagar ran out the gate into the wilderness, headed south down the road toward Shur, which, if you know your geography, was the road back to Egypt, back home, back to the country she had been taken from before she was old enough to choose. She makes it as far as a spring of water, and there in the dirt by the road in the middle of nowhere, she sits down to die. Because where else does a runaway pregnant slave go? And then a stranger is there. The text says, the angel of the Lord found her, Malach Yahweh, the messenger of the Lord. Except, as the conversation unfolds, the text quietly switches. The messenger speaks as though he is God himself. He calls her by name. He asks her a question. Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going? But it gets stranger, because by the end of the conversation, this runaway slave girl, this nobody, this teenager, this property, does something nobody in the Bible has ever done before. She gives God a name. She calls him El Roi, the God who sees me. And the name stuck. 3,500 years later, we are still calling him that. Think about who God chose for that. Not Abraham, not Isaac, not Moses or David or Solomon. The first person in human history to name God is a foreign teenage runaway pregnant slave sitting in the dirt by a road. He came for her. He asked her a question. He left her with a mark, a name for God, and a son she would call Ishmael, which means God hears. He came alone. He came for one. He found her. Visit number 3 is the strangest one yet. It is noon, the hottest part of the day. Abraham is 99 years old, and he is sitting outside his tent under the oak trees at Mamre. 3 days ago, God told him every man in his household had to be circumcised. So 3 days ago, at 99 years old, he did it, to himself, with a flint knife. And so did every other male under his roof, including a 13-year-old boy named Ishmael, whose mother used to be a runaway slave. Abraham is in pain. He is sitting because sitting is the only thing that does not hurt. and then he looks up, and 3 men are standing there in the heat haze. Stay with me, because here is where the text does something you have to slow down for. Abraham, 99 years old, 3 days out from his own circumcision, runs. He does not walk. He does not limp. He runs toward these 3 travelers, throws himself face down in the dust at their feet, and begs them to stay for a meal. He knows, somehow, somewhere in some part of him that does not need words, he knows who is standing in the road. He kills a calf. He has bread baked. He gathers butter and milk, and the 3 of them eat under the tree. God eats. Stop and let that one land. The God who made the universe sits down under an oak tree on a hot afternoon and eats a meal a 100-year-old man cooked for him. 2 of them get up after the meal and walk on toward a city called Sodom. The 3rd stays behind, and the text now stops calling him a man and starts calling him by his name, the Lord. And Abraham and the Lord have a conversation under the oak tree, a back and forth, an argument, a negotiation. Will you spare the city for 50 righteous, 45, 30, 20, 10? And the Lord agrees every time, like a father patiently letting a son make his case. Before he leaves, he looks at Abraham and asks one more question. Is anything too hard for the Lord? And inside the tent, eavesdropping through the canvas, a 90-year-old woman named Sarah laughs out loud, because next year, when she is 91, she is going to hold a baby in her arms. And God will pick the boy's name himself, Yitzhak. He laughs. 3 encounters, 3 centuries between them. 3 completely different people, a couple in a garden, a runaway slave, in the desert, a 100-year-old patriarch under a tree, and every time the same fingerprint. He came for one person. He came alone. He asked a question. He left a mark, and we are only halfway through. 3 visits, 3 centuries between them. The same person every time, the same fingerprint. He came alone. He asked a question. He left a mark. If you have ever felt like the one God forgot, stay with this video, because the next 3 visits are going to make that lie unspeakable. Subscribe. If this is your kind of question, and in the comments tell me which visit hit you hardest so far. The garden, the wilderness, or the oak tree. I read every one of them. Now watch what happens next. We have to go back to the river, back to the man we left there at the start of the video, back to Jacob. He is 97 years old. He has just sent everything he owns and everyone he loves across the Jabbok to the far bank. His wives, his 2 handmaids, his 11 sons. The youngest of those sons, Joseph, is about 6 years old. They are all sleeping on the other side. And Jacob is here, alone, listening to the river, counting how many hours until his brother Esau and 400 armed men arrive at sunrise. And then a man walks out of the darkness. The text does not say where he came from. The text does not say what he looked like. The text only says they wrestled all night, hour after hour after hour, an old man and a stranger gripping each other in the dirt by a riverbank, neither one able to throw the other to the ground. Here's the part nobody tells you. Jacob was good at this. He had wrestled his whole life. He came out of his mother's womb gripping his brother's heel. That is literally what his name means. Yaakov, heel grabber. He grabbed his brother's birthright. He grabbed his brother's blessing. He grabbed his father-in-law's flocks. He grabbed his way through 97 years of human existence, And now he is gripping a stranger in the dark, and he will not let go until the stranger has had enough. The text says, "When he saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched him." One touch, the hollow of Jacob's thigh, the hip, and the joint goes, just like that. The most powerful man in Canaan, the man who had grabbed his way to wealth and family and power, is suddenly on the ground in agony, and he still will not let go. He clings to the stranger's leg, and he says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And the stranger asks him a question, "What is your name?" And the old man, for the first time in his entire life, tells the truth. Yaakov, heel grabber, cheat, liar. And the stranger says no more. From this morning on, your name is Yisrael, because you have struggled with God and with men, and you have prevailed. Jacob asks for the stranger's name. The stranger refuses to give it, but Jacob already knows, because the next thing he does is name the place Peniel, face of God. He says, "I have seen God face to face, and somehow I am still alive." And then the sun comes up, and the stranger is gone, and Jacob limps across the river toward his brother. He limped for the rest of his life. He lived to be 147 years old, which means he carried that limp for 50 years, 5 decades. Every step, every morning, every time he stood up from bed, every time he sat down in his tent, every time he walked across a floor, something in his body remembered the night God came down to a riverbank to fight him and would not let him go until he was a different man. That is the man you met in the opening. That is the river. That is the limp. Visit number 5. 300 years later, a different mountain, a different man, and the same fire that does not consume. His name is Moses. He is 80 years old. He has spent the last 40 years of his life on the back of a desert watching sheep that do not even belong to him. He used to be a prince in Pharaoh's palace. Now he is a fugitive. Now he is a shepherd. Now he is forgotten. And one afternoon, on the side of a mountain called Horeb, he sees a bush on fire, which in the desert is not unusual. What is unusual is that the bush is not burning up. So he turns aside to look. And here's the part you need to slow down for. The text says it was the angel of the Lord in the flame, the Malach Yahweh. But then a few verses later, the text quietly switches. The voice from the bush calls himself by name. Ehyeh Asher, Ehyeh. I am that I am. The name above every name. The name no Jewish scribe will write in full to this day. The first thing the voice says to Moses is this: "Take off your sandals. The ground you are standing on is holy." And here is what most people miss. The God who used to walk in a garden in the cool of the day, the God who used to sit and eat under an oak tree, is now telling a man to take off his shoes before he can come closer. Something has changed. Something is different. The ground is not the same ground it used to be, but God still came down. He still came alone. He still came to one man, and he still asked a question: "Whom shall I send?" And the man on the mountain, the shepherd, the murderer, the 80-year-old fugitive said, "Send me." And he stuttered every word he ever said for the rest of his life. The mark. Visit number 6. 40 more years pass. The man who took off his sandals at the burning bush is dead, buried somewhere on the wrong side of the Jordan in an unmarked grave. The people he led are finally home, and the man leading them now is a soldier named Joshua. Joshua is standing outside the walls of Jericho the night before the battle. He is walking the perimeter looking at the fortifications planning his approach, and he looks up, and a man is standing in front of him with a drawn sword. Joshua, soldier. First, theologian. Second, asks the only question a commander knows how to ask. Are you for us or for our enemies? And the man says, no. Let that one sit. He does not say, I am for you. He does not say, I am for them. He says no, because he does not pick sides. He outranks both sides. He is the side. He is the captain of the army of the Lord, and he has come not to take sides in this war, but to fight his own. Joshua falls on his face. He worships, and the figure with the sword accepts the worship, which matters more than you might realize, because every angel in Scripture who is offered worship refuses it. Every single one. There is a moment in the book of Revelation where the Apostle John falls down at the feet of an angel, and the angel says, "Get up, do not worship me. I am a fellow servant." Every angel refuses worship. This one does not refuse it. And then he says to Joshua exactly what he once said to Moses, "Take off your sandals. The place you are standing on is holy." And this is where it gets remarkable. You might be thinking these are old stories, ancient stories, stories from a world that does not exist anymore. But almost 1,500 years after Joshua took off his sandals outside Jericho, in a garden behind a house in the Italian city of Milan, a 31-year-old man named Augustine was lying face down under a fig tree, weeping. He had been running from God his whole life. He was the most brilliant rhetorician in the Roman Empire. His mother had prayed for his soul for 30 years. He was tired. He was alone, and he was sobbing in the dirt under a tree. And from the house next door, a child's voice started singing. A small voice, sing-song like the voice of a child playing a game. Tolle lege, tolle lege. Take up and read. Take up and read. Augustine reached for a scroll of the Apostle Paul's letter to the Romans. He opened it at random. He read one verse, and his entire life broke in half. He wrote about that moment a decade later in a book called Confessions. You can still read it. You can read the exact page. You can stand in the spot of that garden in Milan today. God did not stop walking among us at the end of the Old Testament. He just changed how he shows up. 500 years after Joshua stood outside Jericho with his sandals in his hand, the seventh visit happens. But by now, everything has changed. Jerusalem has been burned. The temple Solomon built has been pulled apart, stone by stone. The royal family of Judah has been led on chains 1,000 miles east, across deserts you and I will never see, into the capital city of the most powerful empire on the planet, Babylon. And in that city, in the court of a king named Nebuchadnezzar, are 3 young Hebrew men, pulled out of the rubble of Jerusalem when they were teenagers, trained in the king's language, given new names, made to serve in the king's palace. You probably learned their Babylonian names in Sunday school: Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Their real names, the names their mothers gave them in Jerusalem before the city fell, were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. 3 boys, probably between 17 and 20 years old, when the story we are about to tell takes place. The king builds a statue 90 feet tall. He gathers every official in his empire and tells them to bow when the music plays. Everyone bows. 3 young men do not. So they are brought before the king. The king gives them one more chance. He says, "I will heat the furnace and throw you in. And what God is there who can deliver you out of my hand?" And the three young men, who almost certainly know they are about to die, look up at the most powerful king in the known world and say this, "Our God is able to deliver us from your fire. But even if he does not, even if he lets us burn, we will not bow." This is not a story about three boys who survived a fire. This is not a story about a furnace 7 times hotter than normal. This is not a story about a pagan king who finally got it. This is a story about the moment God walked into the worst place on earth and refused to let his people burn alone. The king orders the furnace heated 7 times hotter than its normal heat. The soldiers who carry the 3 young men up the ramp are killed by the heat before they can step back. They drop dead at the mouth of the furnace, still gripping the men they were sent to execute. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah fall bound into the fire. And Nebuchadnezzar, the king who has just sentenced 3 men to die, stands up from his throne. The text says he stands up in haste. He hurries to the edge of the furnace. He looks in, and then he turns to his counselors and he says, "Listen to the exact wording the Bible gives us. Did we not throw 3 men bound into the fire?" And his counselors answer, "Yes, O king, 3. And Nebuchadnezzar says, "No, I see 4 men walking, loose, unharmed. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God." Pause on that. 4 men in a furnace heated 7 times hotter than normal, walking around, loose, unharmed, and the 4th one had no name, no introduction, no business being there, and he was walking. Here's what most people miss. This is the 7th time God walks on earth in the Old Testament, and it is the loudest one, because for the first time, somebody who is not on God's side, a pagan emperor, the man who burned the temple to the ground, looks into a fire and recognizes him. Around the year 155, AD, less than 130 years after the resurrection, a Christian philosopher named Justin Martyr sat down across a table from a Jewish scholar named Trypho, and Justin Martyr argued point by point that the figure who had walked in the garden, who had found Hagar in the desert, who had eaten under Abraham's oak tree, who had wrestled Jacob until dawn, who had stood in the burning bush, who had drawn his sword outside Jericho, and who had walked in the fire with 3 Hebrew boys, was the same person who would one day be born in Bethlehem. The church fathers who came after him saw the same thing. Tertullian, Athanasius, Eusebius, Augustine. For almost 2,000 years, this has been the historic Christian reading. The person walking in the fire with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah was Jesus. Before his name was Jesus, before there was a manger, before there was a star, he came down into the furnace. He came down into the worst place on earth. He came down so that 3 boys would not have to burn alone. Stop and let that be heavy for a moment. 6 times before this, he came for someone in a corner, Adam hiding behind a tree, Hagar running into a desert, Abraham in pain. 3 days after a knife, Jacob alone, terrified by a river, Moses on the back of nowhere 80 years old, forgotten, Joshua before a war. He was not sure he could win. And the 7th time, he came down in the Old Testament. He came down into a fire with his people in the worst place to make sure they did not burn alone. And then a few hundred years later, in a small town outside Jerusalem, he came one more time. And this time he did not leave. On a cold night in a small town, nobody important had ever visited a teenage girl, wrapped a newborn in strips of cloth, and laid him in a feeding trough. And the same God who had walked in the garden in the cool of the day, the same God who had found Hagar by the well in the wilderness, the same God who had eaten under Abraham's oak tree, the same God who had wrestled Jacob until dawn, the same God who had stood in the burning bush, the same God who had drawn his sword outside Jericho, the same God who had walked in the furnace with 3 Hebrew boys, finally stopped walking. The Apostle John, writing his gospel near the end of his life, would use a single Greek word to describe what happened that night. Eskenosin. He tabernacled among us. He pitched his tent, and he refused to take it down. He had come, and this time he stayed. So, 3 things to take with you. First, the Old Testament is not a collection of stories about a distant God. The Old Testament is the record of a person walking through human history in disguise. Christians have called this a Christophany since the 2nd century. It is not a fringe reading. It is the historic reading held by every major branch of the church for almost 2,000 years. Second, he always came for one person, always alone, always in the worst moment of their life. Which means if the pattern holds, and the pattern has held for 6,000 years, when he comes for you, it will probably not be in a crowd. It will probably not be on a Sunday morning. It will probably be alone, in a wilderness, by a well, under a tree. And third, whatever the worst place in your life is right now, the fire you cannot get out of, the night you cannot sleep through, the question you have stopped praying because you are tired of asking. He has done this before. He walked into the worst place on earth and made it the place where 3 boys walked free. He still walks there. He still does not let his people burn alone. Which of the 7 visits hit you the hardest? The garden, the wilderness, the oak tree, the river, the bush, the sword, or the fire? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. He has been walking among us since the very beginning. And the next time he comes, he is not leaving.